This morning we're going to begin to talk about what it means to be dishonored. We've all had faces like these at times where we've been stressed, or maybe we were grieved, or maybe we were even surprised, and at each one of those moments we were dishonored. And so we're going to talk about that because we've all been lied about, and we've all been taken advantage of, we've all been cheated on. But the truth is that all those things may be true about what others have done to us. We're also guilty of our own fair share of dishonoring other people. And in fact, we're so good at that many times we don't even recognize when we're doing it. We dishonor somebody and we don't find out about it for who knows how long, right? I mean, time goes on, but it always surfaces at some point. It may take a few days to find out about it. Maybe you come home and you see your spouse and she's giving you that look where it's just like, you did something wrong the other day, and it's left me unsettled this whole time. It may take a few weeks to find out about it. It may take a few months or years to find out about it. And there's some cases that we don't even find out that we've dishonored other people until after they've passed away. And that's when it's the worst, because there's no going back. There's no making it right. And so we have to ask ourselves the question, how can we catch this on the front end? How can we avoid it? How can we learn to honor others rather than dishonor others so we don't have to deal with these moments? But before we do so, we have to talk about what goes into a name, because names include more than just letters strung together that make a sound. And instead, names actually include your character and your identity. If you don't believe me, we'll have a little bit of an exercise here. I'm going to say a name, and I want to solicit your response. So if I said the name John, and I give you a few minutes, most all of us have met at least one person named John. And then immediately when I said the name John, we began to list all the Johns we know in our mind. And not only did we come up with a list of faces, right? We actually came up with a list of our own feelings about these kind of Johns. Whether this John was somebody we worked with who was dishonest, or whether it was our best friend in high school, or maybe he was the class clown, maybe this, maybe that. But we all have our feelings, and they're so tied to a name. They're so tied to a name. And it's this very principle that makes naming a child so difficult. I think back to Abby and I when we started trying to come up with names for Alethea. She had been a teacher for about 1.5 years, and because of some substituting she had done, she had ran into about 90 different kids, within 1.5 years time. And when it came time to start looking for names that we would choose for our child, we didn't know if it was a boy or a girl. We were surprised. When it came time, she had a blacklist of names that were not options. Because in her 1.5 years of teaching, she ran across what she identifies as stinkers in her classroom. And these stinkers gave her such a rough time that she couldn't even imagine calling her child a name that would solicit all these negative feelings, right? She didn't want to start our child off on the bad foot, she wanted to give her a chance. And so we do that. We decided to give our daughter a unique name, one that had meaning, and yet we didn't want to carry all the baggage along with that name. Others of us have decided to name our children after other people who we've had good experiences with their names. And the more we care about someone, the more we'll be careful to bring honor to their name. And this is just one of the many instances that we were created to be just like God. You see, the nation of Israel, they learned this in the very beginning of their relationship with God. And that culture at the time, it was kind of a hodgepodge of gods. If two nations were warring against one another, the one who won the battle, their God was just assumed to have been stronger, and so now everybody worships this new God who's obviously stronger. He brings about results, right? And so we worship the God who gives us the best results. Maybe the harvest was more plentiful in one nation over another, and so they said, well, you worship this God for your harvest, so maybe I should start worshiping your God too. And it was just a matter of, let's get as many gods on our side and let's do as much as we can so that maybe we'll fare the best. But the problem with this system of believing in all these random gods was twofold. One, these gods didn't talk. And because of that, the second reason They didn't talk, and so they couldn't actually tell you what they wanted. So not only was it a guessing game which God was the best, it was actually a guessing game as to what each God wanted. So it was, I'll sacrifice a calf this time to show you how devoted I am. Well, that didn't work. I'll sacrifice 2 calves. And eventually getting so severe that it would become, I'll sacrifice my child to this God if I can be successful, if you'll bless me, if you'll do this, if you'll do that. And so it was in the midst of this culture that a man named Moses heard the word from the Lord out of a burning bush, and this is where Christianity starts getting interesting, right? We always have these weird stories that, a bush is burning and it doesn't burn up, and it's like, what? That's really in the Bible? Yeah. Well, so it's in the Bible, and the Lord speaks to him, which is a rare thing, first of all. There's a God who speaks. But not only does he speak to him, he gives him direction. He says, I want you to deliver my people out of slavery. And so Israel at that time was under Egypt's power, and they were enslaved. And so, but that's not the craziest thing that happened. The craziest thing happened 2 months after they were delivered out of Egypt. Because they'd gone through this whole process and learning to trust God, as he parted the sea and as he provided food and he provided water in the desert. Not only were these kind of like amazing things that, wow, this God's proving himself pretty powerful, and this God's proving that he cares about us a lot, he did something no other God at this time had done. 2 months after he delivered his people. This God spoke. But he didn't just speak to one person. It wasn't just, this guy said he believed in, or heard from God, and so we better follow him. Instead, this guy spoke to the whole group of people, to all of Israel. And so after he proved that, hey, I care about you, and not only do I care about you, but I'm actually strong enough to bring about what I want. I'm the big God. I control all the others. They think that those are gods. Those aren't gods. I am so much stronger. I am the one. Right? And so after he proves this to his people, he talks to him. And what does he do? He sets up guidelines for the relationship. And I think some of us ought to take note of this. Because a lot of times we're in relationships, and the relationships we're in, we don't set up guidelines. We don't set up rules to live by. And when we don't do that, it's always chaos. And we're going to talk about one of those ways today, that it turns to chaos. So we're going to pick up in Exodus 20, starting in at verse 1 and 2. And this is what happened when God spoke to his people. Aha, my pages were out of order. I was like, I know there's another page. All right. So he appears to the people, he prepares them and says, hey, this is a big deal. Cleanse yourselves, get ready. I'm going to make an announcement. And so as we're picking up in verse 1, it says, Then God gave the people all these instructions. I am the Lord your God who rescued you from the land of Egypt, your place of slavery. So he's identifying himself. Hey, just in case you're wondering, I'm not the God of this nation or of that nation or of this one. I'm actually the God who delivered you. So I'm identifying myself. And then he begins a list of you must nots. And we know these as the 10 Commandments, right? It's not just you must not. Some of them are you must. And we think of them oftentimes as restrictive, that, we can't do this and we can't do that. I guess we have to do this. But instead, these are guidelines that he set up that said, hey, if you want to bring me honor, and if you want to honor one another, these are things that you should do. So we're going to pay attention to verse 7 in particular today, where he says, you must not misuse the name of the Lord your God. The Lord will not let you go unpunished if you misuse his name. And there it is. God values names, just like we value names. And God values honor, just like we value honor. And from that point on, Israel understood the importance of God's name. So much so that we see phrases in the Bible that say things like, God would save his people for his name's sake, would be the word, or the phrase that would be used after that event. And this is just time and time and time and time again, God would do things for his name's sake, to bring him honor, just to bring him honor. And so there's kind of two things that we pull out of this for application, because we have to ask ourselves the question, how do we treat names? Well, the first way we treat names is we... Click one more time, Bill. Sorry. This is my fault. I made it too difficult. So the first thing you're supposed to do is don't say things you don't mean. And this is the one we always understand. We get it. Right? I mean, we think of, thou shalt not say the Lord's name in vain, and the first thing we think of, oh, well, I can't say, oh my God, I can't say Jesus Christ when I'm upset, I can't say this, I can't say that. And so we get this one, so I'm not going to spend that long on it. But it doesn't seem to matter if people are grieving, excited, stressed, or they use phrases without any intention of speaking to the God they're addressing. If you don't actually mean to address God, don't say his name. Because when you do, all it's going to do is it's going to just make him seem trivial to every person you ever talk to. It's going to say, oh, my God's really not that important, so I just throw out his name when it really doesn't even matter. And so Christians, right, we caught on to this. We know it. And so we decided, well, maybe if we just change what we say, it'll be okay, right? We won't be saying God. We won't be saying Jesus Christ. Instead, we'll put some code words in that really only the Christians know about. And really, we did a terrible job because everybody knows about them, right? And so I'm going to use a saying that I heard in teen camp when I was growing up. The guy was talking on this subject, and he said a phrase that has forever stuck in my mind. It's not word for word, but the idea is right there. And so he says, Gosh is the father of G's, and if you misuse his name, you'll be danged to heck, right? Because we're okay with saying these words, but we're not okay with saying God, we're not okay with saying Jesus, and we're not okay with saying the word damn or going to hell. We're not allowed to use those words. So instead, we'll just use these code words, right? And all of us laugh because we know we're guilty of it, and all of us laugh because we know that deep down this probably isn't right either. We probably missed it. And some of us in the 21st century have got into texting, right? And so we make it even more cryptic. We say things in text like OMG, right? It's so cryptic, God won't even catch on, right? He has no idea, but clearly he has an idea. And the point comes across from this phrase loud and clear that we can't just substitute. But this, at the same time, leaves us wanting. And I titled my next slide, Lessons from a Church Van, because this is kind of where all of this kind of direction for the sermon came. We were in a church van, and it even started before the church van, because we were at our quiz meet this past Saturday, or not this past Saturday, not yesterday, a week from yesterday, and we were at a quiz meet, and the last round of the quiz, a girl jumped early, and so she had to finish a question, but there were multiple ways she could finish the question. So she's rattling off all her questions, and then she's going through all of her answers, trying to get this question right. And at one point, she falls down on her knees, and she's thinking, and you can just tell, I know this answer, but I can't find it. And she looks up and she says, God help me. And initially, I had the same response that probably many of you had. It was, oh, this is a quiz meet, and you just said God's name. I can't believe you just said that, And so it kind of set me off guard. And I was convicted of it later. And I'll share more about that in a minute. But on the way home, the subject came up. It came up about God's name and its importance. And the teens in our van, there were 4 of us on our trip, and we all came to the conclusion that neither saying God's name or substitutes when we don't mean it, neither one of those are helpful, right? We get it. But then there was one teen that stuck out. She was left dissatisfied. She said a phrase that really highlights a profound truth. So when you hear it, don't get offended. Instead, start looking maybe towards yourself. She said, I hate it when adults get picky with words. We have to be able to say something. And it kind of struck me funny, because I was thinking, well, yeah, like I've been one of those adults that gets picky on words, you know? Like, I get that. But now all of a sudden, there was this new profound truth that was being lifted up. And it said, but if we can't express ourselves, then all we're going to do is be bottled up and bottled up and bottled up with all these emotions from our grief and our stress and our excitement. And we'll never be able to express ourselves. And that brings me to the second point that I think comes from the scripture. And that is, not only are we not to say the things we don't mean, so don't say the things you don't mean, but we're actually supposed to do say the things that we do mean. And that's number 2. So don't say the things you don't mean. Don't say things that you actually have no intention of saying. If you say the name of God and you don't actually intend to address him, just don't say it. But do say the things that you do mean. And we're going to talk about that a little more. You see, God's intent was not that we lose the ability to express ourselves. His intent was not even to scare us out of being bold or angry with him. If this was his intent, we wouldn't find all of the Psalms that we do in our Bible. Psalms where people come out and they say things like, "Oh Lord," and "Oh my God." We've read 2 of such this morning. Even Jesus quoted a psalm saying, "Oh my God, why have you abandoned me?" Those are pretty strong feelings. And I, for one, would be ashamed, maybe even fearful of saying such things. Maybe simply because these phrases have been ingrained in me that these are terrible things to say. So if God's intent was not to do that, his intent was to avoid expressing ourselves in ways that made him seem trivial. So wouldn't it be also misusing his names if when you were praying, you weren't really open and honest with him? If we would call on the name of the Lord our God, and we would go to him with a portion of maybe what we're feeling, but not really the whole thing, wouldn't we really be saying, "God, I really don't think you're strong enough to handle what I have"? Or, "God, I really don't think you care enough, or that you love me enough to listen to what I say and to receive it well. So instead, I'm going to believe that your name is something smaller than it really is." Isn't that really misusing his name? So we have to be open and honest with God because he does care and he can handle it. But we have to ask ourselves the question, because this is where we started, so what does this have to do with dishonoring other people? Right? Clearly the first of our 2 truths, the don't say what you don't mean, is not an issue for us with other people. I don't have the habit of going around and saying, "Oh, my Pastor Danny, I mean, I don't have that habit, and you don't have that habit either, right? You don't say, "Oh, my Dave Rook," or, that just sounds silly. And if we did do that, which would be better than saying God's name in vain, everybody would just laugh at us rather than we would actually fit in. We don't have that problem. But the problem we do have is that we misuse others' names when we're not open and honest with them. Because we give them the same spiel that maybe you're not big enough to handle it, or you're not caring enough to listen to it. And more than just being open and honest with them, do we also have some guilt in not providing space and providing availability that they can come to us and be open and honest with us? And it's a scary thing because when you open the doors and you say, "You can be open and honest with me," you've just given somebody free rein to tell you anything that they feel about you, to do with your name whatever they wish. So I have a question that I think will be helpful in this. And it's a simple question. It's, how am I doing? If we can make it our practice to ask this question, we'll be better off for it. And why? Because every time you ask this question, I can ask this question to Alethea, although she can't answer me right now. I can ask this question to my wife, how am I doing in our marriage? How am I doing as a husband? I can ask this question to my professors. I can say, how am I doing as a student? I can ask this question to Danny. I can say, how am I doing as a pastor under your leadership? How am I doing? And the more we ask this question, the more we solicit everybody else's feelings towards us. And the more we get their feelings, the more we're going to learn when we've upset them. It's not going to be a week later. It's not going to be a day later. It's not going to be a year later. And we're not going to face the fact that when people die and they were dishonored by us, we're not going to have to face that. Instead, we solicit their ideas and we become a better parent. We become a better child. We become a better student. We become all these things because we're learning how to honor other people. We're giving them space. And so I want you to make it your practice. It sounds really dumb, and it probably will make you feel really silly to just go ahead and say, hey, how am I doing? You know, like, it's so unnatural. Nobody does it. But when you do it, you solicit their feelings, and you honor their name. And so as we close today, I want to provide some space here at the altar. I know we've already come down to the altar once. Maybe twice is too much for you. But if not, it could be that we either have a lot of pent-up emotion towards God that we've not expressed because we felt like we couldn't. And we need to express ourselves. We can't just sit on all of it. Or it could be that maybe there's something between you and somebody else. Maybe you've been dishonored, maybe they've been dishonored. And you need to come forward and take the opportunity to come to God and say, God, I need help asking this question because it's just so awkward and unreal and just something so different than I've ever been exposed to. But if you can help me ask this question, I will push forward in your strength, and I'll ask it. And as I learn the ways that I'm dishonoring other people, I'll change, and I'll learn to honor their names. It might be you have broken relationships, and you realize that you have some ownership in the brokenness. If you realize you need to ask this question of how am I doing, would you come forward? And we'll just have a short time of prayer together. I'll be more than happy to pray with you. Pastor Danny would be more than happy to pray with you. But if you realize that you need to straighten some things out, I want to encourage you to come at this time. And we'll just take a few minutes. Close in prayer. And while I'm praying, you're welcome to come. You're welcome to work on the relationships here on earth. You're welcome to work on your relationships between you and God. God doesn't want you not to be able to express yourself. He doesn't want you to say things you don't mean. But He's big enough and strong enough, and He cares so much that He desires that you come and say the things that you do mean. If you're open with Him, He'll be open with you. Let's pray. God, we don't want to dishonor other people. It's not as if we just want to go out and just upset people. But we recognize in this moment that we do it. There are times, there are places we don't even intend to, and yet we say the wrong words. Or maybe we don't say the right words. Or maybe we do things, or maybe we don't do things, and that just gets people upset with us. And we recognize we're not so perceptive that we're going to catch everything and all the feelings that everybody has around us. We realize that. And so in an attempt to both honor your name and to honor the names of those around us, we're going to work to say the things that we do mean and avoid the things that we just don't mean. boldness this week as we go. Allow us to be open with others and provide space and guidelines in order that they might be open with us. In so doing, we'll not only bring honor to them, but we'll use the name of the Lord, the God Most High, the great I Am, the Prince of Peace, the mighty Counselor. We'll use your name in such a way that it will bring all of heaven to rejoicing. We love you so much, Father. Amen. It's not an easy journey. It's not a path that's easily walked. But this morning I encourage you and I bless you in a way that says, go not only in the peace, but in the courage and in the strength of God, who will enable you to honor him and every other person you walk with in this life. You're dismissed. Please go quietly, as we do have some praying.